meeting for Tuesday, April 9th, 2004. We will begin with a roll call.
Ayers.
Here.
Brisbane.
Here.
Tice.
Here.
Zierden.
Here.
And Weaver.
Here. All right, all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And we'll start with approval or amendments of the agenda. Does anyone have any changes, or do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion has passed. We'll begin with an open forum. If there is anyone in the audience, which I don't see anyone, we'll just go ahead and close that open forum and move on to approval of the March 12, 2024 regular planning commission meeting minutes, or if there's any adjustments we need to make. So do we have any adjustments, or do we have approval, motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve. I don't have any adjustments.
And do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion has passed. All right, moving on to any new business. We have no new business. We'll close that out and move on to old business with a zoning code update. So Peter, if you'd like to take us through that.
I'll actually take care of that, Madam Chair. So, as we discussed at their last meeting, kind of gave a kickoff of the zoning code. We looked at the RFP for getting a consultant for that. The City Council did approve that RFP, which is attached. The final version of that is attached on April 1st, so last Monday. And then we have since published that, so that is out on the street. And responses to that are due on April 26th. Peter and I actually met with our first consultant yesterday. So generally during this kind of process, it's very familiar for consultants just to reach out, ask some different questions to better understand your process, so they can make the best proposal they have and try to make sure it meets where our goals are. So what we wanted to do is, as I talked about in March 12 meeting, is to just have a further conversation about kind of this process and what some of the Planning Commission's goals and your desired level of involvement are. Some of these questions were actually things that were asked by the consultant yesterday, and we said, well, we're actually talking to them tomorrow about it. And so I've got essentially 4 questions I'd just like to work through and get answers for. The first 3 actually have to do with the consultant selection process, and then the 4th is more of the actual, as we move through the process of updating the zoning code. So let's move through them. So the first really comes down to, do you desire to interview consultants, or do you want to just have staff make a recommendation on who to select? In this case, I do recommend interviewing consultants, especially for something like a zoning code. I think it's very important for you to get a face-to-face with the different consultants, hear from them. Again, part of figure out who do you feel comfortable working with, understanding their process. Big things when it comes to zoning code, it's going to be about whose approach do you think is best and whose approach do you like and to think that'll result in the best zoning code for Breezy Point. So we do recommend doing that. There are some different ways you can do interviews. One, you could call a special meeting in May, so have it separate from your regular meeting. Purpose of that is purely to interview consultants, or you could hold them during your regular meeting. So that would be probably dependent on what kind of an agenda you have and how many consultants you want to interview, whether you want to do it there or later. Peter can probably speak to, I don't know, Peter, if you want to speak to a little bit, maybe what any applications we received yet for May, what the May agenda is looking like at this point.
We did get an applicant in for the May agenda for setback reduction, and the deadline is yet to pass, so we definitely have one app on.
Yeah, so we already have one, potentially more. So You know, I would recommend if you're open to it, holding a special meeting just for this. If you're open to that, other option is I guess on this too is, do you want to interview them as a whole commission, or would you rather appoint? Alternatively, you could appoint like an interview committee to work with staff. So I guess we'll just start with that one. Do you want to do interviews, and how would you like to? And would you like to do them in a special meeting, regular meeting, or appoint a committee to do that and report back to you?
So why don't we all just say, question number one, do we think that one or all of us should do interviews?
Yes.
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 Okay, so I think we all agree that we
Okay.
should have an interview process. I would recommend a special meeting just because I think if we have a lot of stuff on the agenda, which we might not know at the last minute, it could get long. Does everybody think that's a good idea?
Is that something you do in business hours or in the evening? Because you don't need it open to the public, do you?
So a special meeting would be open to the public.
Oh,
But you can do whatever you want. Again, with a special meeting, you can call that for whatever you want that to be. So if for you all, you said, you know what, 10 o'clock works best for us, you could hold it for, from 10 to noon or whatever, however long you think it's going to take. So yeah, special meeting, when it comes to special meeting, you get to pick the day and the time. We just have to make sure we notice it 72 hours in advance. Obviously, if we're deciding on a day or a time today, that'd be easiest. Otherwise, if you want, I could poll the commission like we've done in past, pick some dates, and then figure out which day works best for all of you at a later date, and then just go from whichever one gets the most votes. Again, applications on proposals are due the 26th, and then we'd obviously want to get some time to kind of put them all together. So I would probably say your meeting in May is May 14th. So I'd probably say you could either go before or after. Ideally, you don't want to probably go later than the week of the 20th, just because then it's Memorial Day weekend. And we'd like to be able to get a recommendation from the commission in for the city council to act on at their June 3rd meeting.
Could we do it the week before our planning and zoning? Like
So the week of the 6th?
Yeah.
You could do that. So I will say, again, we're flexible. So Monday is the city council meeting. So if you wanted to do it in the evening, Monday is not available, and then Thursday's Parks and Recreation, so that's not available. If you wanted to do it in the evening on the that week, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, those would be available. I will say Wednesday the 8th. Again, I do not have to be here. Wednesday the 8th, I will actually not be in town. My brother is graduating from his law enforcement program, so we will be in Alexandria. But I don't have to be here. I can.
How does everyone feel about doing a morning appointment? Or does it not work for anyone to do daytime? You have to do after hours?
So, does Tuesday the 7th? Are there any?
I would rather have the night.
The 9th?
Yeah.
If we do the 9th, again, Parks and Recreation does meet at 5.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
So we'd have to meet before then.
And I can't do the night, but
Okay. What if we do the 7th at the same time or a little bit earlier?
I would say probably like 5 or
7.
6 would probably, considering that consultants will probably have to come up.
Yep.
I would say probably shoot either for 5 or 6 start, so that way they can.
How about a little earlier?
I can do as early as anyone else could. And
Like
that's
4? When you say
Well,
earlier, Roger, what are you thinking?
I
before
was
we,
thinking 4, because consultants, well, how many is there?
that's right. And the other thing is, does everybody want to be in this, or, because we also have the option of doing a committee.
Mhm.
So we should talk about that.
And if
too.
if one of you is not available and you're okay with that, again, we can just do it the 4 too. I just don't want to exclude anyone who wants to be as part of the interview process. So the 7th at 4, does anyone have any concerns with the Tuesday the 7th at 4 p.m.?
Keep you there, Lee?
Well, I work till 3:30. It's like, yeah.
5.
I mean, 5 would be better for me, but I don't want
Well, I know, I could leave early, because I got something going
What time do you have to be? Would you need to be out of here, Roger?
on. Oh, 7?
Okay. So I'll speak to this. That kind of goes to then to the next, actually goes to the next question a little bit. So how fast do you get out of here? If you do 5 o'clock, how many consultants? Okay, obviously, this is a little dependent on how many consultants we get. Do you want to interview every consultant we get, or do you want us to narrow it down? When I was in Brainerd, they wanted everyone. We interviewed 6. We were there for 3.5 hours. It was a little cumbersome. I will say, as I put in the packet, part of my concern with that too is from a consultant perspective. Obviously, they know that when they're submitting, they're going to be competing against others, but now to ask them, the other expectation here is that they come in person. So that'd be kind of the expectation is they're coming in person. Is now, if they're competing against 6 others, that they kind of have the way of, is it worth it making the trip, to come up here when they're one of, a 1 in 6 chance or 1 in 5 chance of getting the job. So they have to kind of weigh that. So the question would be is, depending on how many we get, do you want to interview them all or kind of narrow it down to 2 to 3?
I would actually say the top 2.
Top
in my
2?
opinion. What does everybody else think?
3. I'd say 3.
I would say probably 2, unless there's from your guys' recommendation that there's 2 people that are close or somewhat similar, then bump it to 3. Just
If you do 3, you plan for, how I kind of would see 3, you plan for, 20 to 30 minutes per consultant, and then I guess later question, even the next question, and then time for you all to deliberate. And actually what you could do is interview them, maybe have time to deliberate. You don't have to make your decision that night, because if you're going to meet on the 7th, and then your next meeting is the next week, you could actually save your decision for the 14th.
Most of them from the metro area?
A lot of them probably will be from the metro area. Some of them, when we did in Brainerd, we got proposals from out of state. None of them ended up coming once we said we wanted them to interview. They pulled. But there was at least one that was Fargo area. So you'll get Fargo, Moorhead area. There's some consultants out there. I think there's some in St. Cloud, have St. Cloud offices. A lot of these consultants, what they'll do is they actually have multiple offices. So it just depends on where their planners are coming from, whether they're coming from their St. Cloud office or their Woodbury office, so most of them are within 2 hours. So they don't necessarily have a problem with coming up. They're kind of used to that.
Still makes a late night for them if they're here late in the afternoon.
That's what I was thinking.
But if you come in at 5, they come in, interview, they could be on the road by, if they're the 5:10-ish interview, you start the meeting, kind of go through our formalities, how it's going to go. First one comes in, presents, they'll be out of here by, 5:45, unless they want to sit and stay.
Can they stay and listen to the other?
It's a public meeting, so I can't kick them out.
No. So Lee, could you make 4:30? Or is that pretty tough?
I could, yeah.
I'm just,
Yeah, because we were talking about maybe 2 hours.
Yeah,
So if
do
we're
it.
done at 3:30, we could start at 4.
4:30.
So we're looking at a special meeting at 4:30 on May 7th. Okay. So that answers that question, so the first question. So then the second question, we kind of already touched on a little bit. 2 to 3, do you want to leave that kind of to our discretion based off of, okay? So with that goes to question point B on there, on number 2 is, how would you like that? Do you want us to kind of leave that to just Peter and I, kind of our professional discretion? Or would you like to appoint one or two of you to work with Peter and I to review them and make that selection?
Do you guys have a preference?
I really don't. I think the idea would be, again, their proposals are due on the 26th, so we would want to, we'll let consultants know as they give their submissions that the interviews will be held on May 7th, so they're given aware. But we'd probably want to tell them if they've been selected to interview no later than probably May 1st, May 2nd. So if they're due the 26th, we'd probably want to meet to review either like Monday the 29th or Tuesday the 30th to kind of make that determination of who is going to be interviewed, so then we can inform them.
You probably want one person at least to be in.
Involved in that?
Mm-hmm. I think it'd be nice to have at least one of you. Obviously, can't have more than two.
Is there anyone who would like to be involved in that? Is there anyone that?
I can, or I don't know. I mean, it would be
During the day.
during the day.
Yep.
Okay, we've got one.
Okay.
I'm unemployed, so.
Yeah, plus Roger. Excellent.
Unemployed or retired? Unemployed or retired? Both.
And then what we'll do, Roger, is once that deadline hits, we can send you the proposals, or even give you, if you want hard copies, print out hard copies, so you can take them and review them prior to us meeting as well.
So, a simple question is, well, I guess, what do you really look for? What they've done in the past? And
Yeah, we'll put together we generally try to put together some kind of like scoring criteria, so we can go
Right.
through and have some some objectiveness to it. So we look at like what kind of previous work history do they have, communities like us, what kind of projects, and then I know for me, a lot of it is what's their process. Are they gonna be up here a lot? Are they gonna be doing this from afar? That weighing those things, and how comfortable are you with it? What is their timeline? How much are they? What's their cost? Does that fit within what the council budgeted? Things like that. So we'll kind of create a scoring criteria. We aren't necessarily bound to it, but at least helps us figure out generally, especially if there's 4+ applicants. It just helps us kind of put some objectiveness to the selection.
I'm sure they can look at it and say the budget is X amount, we can't do it for that, and they don't even.
Yeah, some of them will do that. They'll. Now I think our budget is healthy. What the council budgeted for this project, again, knowing what we've done in the past, the council did budget $125,000 for this, so I'm not really concerned about our budget being too restrictive. But you'll see everything. When we did it in Brainerd, we had proposals between $80,000 and $200,000. So that answers questions 1 and 2. Question 3 gets into the interviews themselves. There's kind of 2 different ways you can do it. Peter and I can work together and create a kind of a template of questions where they come up here, and we'll actually probably get rid of the dais and have more like a table, so it's a little less formal. They don't have to stand there for 20 minutes. They can sit and talk. Whether if you just want to have specific canned questions that you ask every single consultant the same list of questions, or the opposite is let them actually come up with, tell them, we want a 10 to 15 minute presentation on pretty much who you are, your proposal, things like that, and then have Q&A afterwards. I've seen it gone both ways. In my experience, I think to have them present and then Q&A is actually a little more beneficial, because then you really see who they are, what their process is, how they think, how they approach things, and then you can ask any questions you have off of that presentation.
I like that because you're doing a more structured selection process with questions, so that you'll be able to formalize the basics, and then when we get to them, that's already been established, and we can just hear the presentation and ask questions.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm on board.
All right.
So we'll do the presentation followed by Q&A.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if there's any specific questions, I think that we should be asking if they don't cover it in the presentation.
Yeah, and if there's anything, and also if there's anything that you want us to be sure to let them know that you want them to cover during the presentation, you can let us know ahead of time so we can tell them, hey, by the way, in your presentation, the commission really wants you to touch on this thing.
Right.
Okay. Okay, so that, I think at that point we have the selection process. So again, proposals are due at the end of the day on the 26th. Then the following week we'll set a time, Roger, probably the 29th or the 30th, for the three, you, me, and Peter, to sit down and score them and to select who are the 2 to 3 consultants we'll interview. Then on May 7th at 4:30 we'll do that process. Should just have us out of here before 7, Roger. And then probably I think we'll plan on, you can have any deliberation you want, but maybe we save the decision for the 14th, your regular meeting, if you'd like. You can decide that. Again, you can even decide that at the meeting if you want to. And then I will say, what the decision you're making is a recommendation to the city council. So we'll then take your recommendation, and then on June 6th? It's like late. June 3rd. At their council meeting on June 3rd, then the council will take up your recommendation and formally approve consultant. And then we'll allow the consultant, execute that agreement with the consultant, and then get going in June. So that leaves the last question being, again, something you don't have to decide today, but I know, again, this is one of the questions that the consultant we already met with did ask. So I'm assuming we'll get more questions about this as well. Is once a consultant's selected and we get working on the actual update process, do you desire to work as a whole body or appoint a working group that reports back to the full commission as needed? So obviously this is not going to be like a week by every week you're going to meet. It's not going to be like that. But it could be, there probably will be periods where you might be, either there's going to be an item on your agenda every month, or we might be saying, hey, in addition to your regular meeting, because you have, other work that needs to be done, CUPs, variances, whatever, we're going to need you to hold a workshop to work with the consultants. So just kind of prepare for that. If you choose to go full, that means, everything is a public meeting. We have to notice it, and there'll be times we might ask you to meet more than once in a month. Not weekly by any means. If it's a committee, then we can that working committee can just set up times they need to work. It doesn't have to be publicly noticed, things like that. And then at your regular council meetings, the committee can just report back to the commission. So it's all kind of how much involvement do you all each want to have in this process. And it can change too. You could do committee, and then as we get more, decide to, we want the whole commission involved in this and change it. But it'd be kind of nice to know from the get-go how you'd like to work on it.
Committee's only 3,
Less than 3.
so 2.
2.
I kind of like the idea of starting with the committee, just to get the feet wet, so we're not utilizing all of the public time for that. And then,
Streamlines it a little too.
and then once it gets maybe to points where there's decisions, something significant, then maybe pull that into one of our meetings.
And we don't have to, if the commission is as consensus, that's what you do. You don't have to decide who those members are today. We have time to decide who those members are. But I just want to make sure that if there's consensus on that.
What do you guys think?
Because probably will be some things that do come back to the full commission of like, hey, we probably want full commission input on this. And on that committee too, I think what we'll also ask that there be at least one council member on that committee. So how I see this kind of core working group being is, myself, Peter, the 2 commission members, and a council member. So it'll be 5. And then we'll bring in other people as necessary. Like if we're talking there'll be times where, we're talking zoning, things like utilities or streets and stuff will come into play. We'll bring in Joe's here to talk about those. If we want to talk about public safety or something, we might bring in the police chief for specific discussions. So they'll kind of come in and out. But the core group, I think our goal would be me and Peter in this situation, 2 commissioners and then a council member. Once you get to that 5, that's kind of like the max group you want to get before things start to get unruly.
Too many chiefs.
And again, they'll be likely. Again, these are things that we'll look for in proposals. Is what kind of public involvement? That was one question that this consultant asked us yesterday. What kind of public involvement are we expecting? And so see what they propose of, stakeholder meetings and things like that. So generally, that's a good thing to see is bringing in stakeholders for be it someone from the chamber or the resort or other business community or just even just residents and having conversations like, what do you think works? What doesn't? What would you like to see? Things like that. So again, those are just things when we're reviewing the proposals we'll probably look for is what do they do outside of staff and the commission. So anyone got any questions about this process right now? Joe?
David, when do you anticipate the project to be completed?
So part of that is determined on the consultant, kind of how they do things. I would anticipate, if I were to say, conservatively, I would just say December 25. Could be done before then. My goal would be like absolutely no later than, because that's the nice thing about that is that kind of element of like January 1 is a great implementation date. You don't want to implement, even if it's done, you do not want to implement a zoning code on July 1st. You're in the middle of building season. That is not the time to implement a zoning code. So at least in Minnesota, we have that benefit of like there's a building season and there's a you're still working, but there's no like breaking ground in January unless it's this winter. It's a little different in a normal winter. So generally we'd say, shoot to a January 1 or something like that implementation so that it goes into effect. People have time to get used to it. We can do public outreach. We can do, one of the things you can always do and cities do pretty regularly when they implement a new zoning code is they do like presentations, like stakeholder meetings of like, hey, here's our new zoning code. We're going to hold these meetings. Contractors, if you want to come in and get the the download of what's new, what's different in our code, come in. We're going to do a presentation where we have quick fact sheets about it. Gives people time to get to know, work with the new code before it's like, well, I want to break ground next week. So also gives Peter a little time to also implement it in the non-busy season as well.
You said December of 2025?
18 months is average.
And the goal is to...
So the goal is really to take our zoning code. This is going to probably be, again, and this is where it could all takes to the approach of what a consultant thinks, and part of generally the beginning processes of any zoning code is they don't jump in right into changing language. It's meeting with commissioners, meeting with council members, meeting with staff, maybe again meeting with members, like stakeholders, and really judging what's the goals, what do you see as problems, before they start even touching language, because those initial meetings really kind of drive, okay, are we truly talking about a repeal and replace, or is this a touch-up? I think the things we've seen, I think, actually looking at our code, I think we kind of are looking at a repeal and replace, but that doesn't mean a completely different code. It just means taking our code, updating this language, and again, repeal and replace, making it much more visual, actually putting diagrams and things in our code to help people understand like what a setback is, what a building envelope is. So if you have like a Actually, if you give me just a second here, I'm actually going to pull up. I'll show you kind of the City of Brainerd Code is a good example of, I think, a goal that I would like to see, and I've heard some of the council members. Oh, okay, now it's being slow. Have also shared that this is something that they would like to see.
It's a different kind of city though, too.
And this is and that is very true, Roger. They're different. So it's not saying let's implement their code.
Right.
It's the style.
Because they must have different setbacks.
Oh yeah, the standards will be different, but they're talking about like the layout. So
You're talking about how do we make it more user-friendly?
yeah, so we don't keep development.
I looked at Pequots and Brass Lakes today trying to figure them out.
Yeah, so for example, how Brainerd does theirs, and let's do the complete code. So what they do is, intent and purpose right at the top. And instead of like what our code does, if you look at our city code, it's like, here's the zoning district, here are all the setback standards, here are all the uses, and like uses, for example, are repeated like 10 different times. What Brainerd's code does is they say zoning districts, here's the master list of all the zoning districts, their names and their, we probably won't have this many. Again, and then you go to like the actual district, so like their traditional neighborhood 1, or actually rural, they went with rural living. Right off the bat, it's minimum lot size, dimensions, setbacks, accessory structure standards, impervious coverage standards, right up front. Second page is, here's kind of like, again, that dotted line, that's your building envelope. So what the expectation is. Let's go to a more, so this is their, let me go over their traditional. Okay, contemporary neighborhood, again. Lot size, it's between 10,000 square feet and 21,700 square feet. They want, lot should have 75 to 90 feet of lot frontage, front yard setbacks a minimum of 30 feet, side setback 10 feet. If you're on a corner, it's 20, rear yards 30. Accessory structure, it's got to be located behind a building. Setbacks 5 feet, 10 on a corner, 5 from the rear. Total allowable accessible structure square footage, 1,500 square feet or 10% of the property square footage, whichever is greater. Total number of accessory structures 2, 3, if no attached is. It's pretty much if you have an attached garage, you get 2. If you don't have an attached garage, you got 3. That's how they kind of did it. And then again, here's a pictorial of kind of showing one of their standards in their district is that the garage has to be behind the front door. So it's showing garages have to be behind the front door. This is your building envelope. The letters go in here. You see like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. Those refer to the letters on this graph. So these are the things that I've seen our council, members of our council, so we would, and members of the public, Teddy, you mentioned of make it really simple for the residents. And then what they do, and again, this is we're seeing more and more common throughout zoning codes, is then later in the code is the actual, well, here are all the uses. So the uses are listed once, not once in every zoning district. So it makes your code go from this to this, because you're only saying it one time. And then at the very back of your code is your master list of like, okay, so I know I'm in an R1 zone. What can I do in an R1 zone? And down at the bottom, let me get to it here. And again, they have it broken out. It's that master list. And we kind of already have a little bit of this in ours where it's, and one thing they also do is they put definitions at the bottom, not the front. Put the stuff that people want at the front. Versus where it's like you've got like 10 pages of definitions before you even get to the actual criteria. Oh, it's not. It's a separate document, I guess. Zoning code. Table of uses, this is what we want. So pretty similar to what we have. But again, just updating it so you can go to, okay, I want to build a boarding house. Okay, that's allowed as a conditional use in the CN2 and the TN2 and the TN3 districts. So you almost could start here, figure out, okay, what is it I want to do? Okay, what is it allowed in what districts and what are the standards? And then work your way backwards. So those are kind of, I think, some of our goals is just, again, make it smaller, not repetitive. Try to get rid of the repetitiveness of the code. Part of the problem also when the code repeats itself 10 times is when you change something one place, you have to change it 10 times. Versus here, you only have to change it in one place. It makes it a lot easier to amend the code. So if you change a use, you're going to the section of the code where it talks about that use. That's the only place you have to change it. So as you amend the code in the future, you end up it reduces the amount of times you end up with discrepancies throughout the code. So, any other questions about the process?
Sounds simple, but it's complicated.
Well, hopefully there's a lot of good consultants out there and they make it a lot less painful than it seems. So.
Now, is this just going to be just zoning period, or there could be any other changes with, let's just say, with building and stuff like that?
So the building code is determined by the state of Minnesota, so we can't touch the building code. I know one of the questions the consultant asked Peter and I yesterday was about, this is the time where they might bring up, do you want to we don't have, do you want to talk about building standards? So not necessarily the building code, but like architectural facade, those kind of things. They will ask you those questions as we go through this. So like, is that something you want to do? And if so, yes. And if so, what are you looking for?
And the question that I have is, I'm not a builder, but I get so many people that, I don't want to do any work in Breezy. I don't want to build a house there or remodel, or, I'd like to see that change, that you shouldn't be that town that nobody wants to work in, not because maybe they're trying to get, away with something that's not structurally, but is this something that could be looked at?
And I
is this
think
something that we could encourage?
And I think part of
builders to come here and sit down and listen. What are your guys' frustrations that you don't want to build?
Yeah, and I think that's part of
stringent?
is if you want, again, kind of something to be clear with even the consultant selected is, what does that look like for that consultant? Inviting builders to come in. The other thing too is this is the time during this process of when we look at, okay, how are things approved? I look at back what White Birch just did. Okay, so obviously they had to get rezoned from an R1 to an R4, our high density residential district. And one of the first things they had to do is get a conditional use permit to do high density residential. And so one of the things we're looking at is, well, should you need a conditional use permit to build high density residential in a high density residential district? So things like that, I think that's a lot of what we're going to be dealing with in our code is this something that really needs a CUP, or is this something where we can put the standards we want in the code, and then if they come in with an application, Peter can just say, okay, the code says you have to have X, Y, Z, and if they meet it, it can be approved administratively, and it gets one less hurdle for a builder to have to go through a CUP process or something like that, or an interim use process.
I think it's more of the inspections is what you were thinking, Lee.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I don't know.
And that I will say gets to the building code side, and that's not really
Right.
something that is under the purview of this. The building code in the state of Minnesota is purely determined by the state of Minnesota.
Right.
So, and there's actually, I don't think it's getting a lot of traction, but there was a bill that was introduced, at least in committee, at the legislature, just about a week or two ago, that they were trying to force all cities to enforce the building code by 2030. I don't think it's gotten a lot of traction, but generally how it goes is a bill like this gets introduced and it keeps getting introduced. So we'll see what happens with that. The League of Minnesota Cities is really trying to push back on that one, because even though cities like Breezy Point do enforce it, to tell every city you have 5 years to enforce the building code, especially really small cities that they don't have staff. There aren't enough fact is there are not enough building officials in the state of Minnesota to enforce the building code in every municipality in the state. So, but anyway, a little diatribe there. Anything else on this? Okay, otherwise, I think I have all the questions we were hoping to get from you today, so thank you.
And moving on to staff reports. Any new staff reports? All right.
Yeah, I do have a few things to add on to for staff report, just some general summaries. We do have one application in so far. To me, it looks like, standard variance for setback requirements, whether it's granted or not is up to the board, of course. But it doesn't look like anything too contentious there so far on anything. One thing I wanted to talk to the board about, to you guys about, is surveys and when they're required for variances and things like that. And just when you have these questions, certainly give me a call or to get just additional perspective on certain things, because I have an applicant coming in and he's got an after the fact variance going, he built something without permit and neighbors called in and he needs a variance approval to have it where it is. But that survey is going to cost him, X amount of dollars to say where that needs to be. And our ordinance requires the surveys for variances, and that's a good thing for our board, because what I'm saying, the most simplest way I can put it is just don't let applicants ever push off their responsibility onto you guys. Where they're like, oh, I need to get a survey or waive this or waive that. Like, your decision needs to stem from the information they're providing, and it's my job to make sure that they get the good information in front of you guys to have as much successful application as possible. I don't say yay or nay either way, but when I talk to the applicants, I say we need clean looking drawings, not strange looking things that are confusing to the board, because in other boards I've worked with, if their applications are incomplete, they lose their money, they get denied, and they go back, if things aren't taken serious. A lot of cities definitely require surveys with their variances. Breezy Point's included in that. The board can waive that. It is in the ordinance that if an applicant comes here, like this particular individual, he was like, well, it's a small shed, and he's like, if I get the survey done, it's going to cost me a lot, and the shed can possibly be moved to a spot that really meets setbacks. And he's like, well, I'd like to ask first, and I'm like, we don't legally get to do that in this world, to come to ask the board first, and then I'll go get the survey later, because you can see the complicated things that happen with that. So, and also with some of those things with, a lot of properties at Breezy Point, when they platted a lot of these areas in the 80s, they put in pins in certain areas. They didn't pin the entire lot. And that's why the predecessors before us spoke about it in the ordinance, where it's like they need to go get a boundary survey done, because the survey companies just they would line up like 5 lots, and they put a pin here, go 5 lots over, then put a pin at the end. And that's, in land use, that's kind of or in the survey world, I see it in both ways. What it is a survey company cutting costs down so they can do their project cheaper, and then also gives them a job later, because they're like, well, we didn't pin the whole thing out. And that is kind of a double-edged type of situation, because as a landowner, I'd be like, well, I bought platted property, it was platted through the city. Certainly today, like when land actors come with all theirs, we require monumentation on every single corner, so it's been done at least once. Now, if those pins get moved because of construction or a road, that's something different. But I didn't bring up a slide, but some of the plats, a lot of them have that where they just skip the center lots and things like that. So And then it's frustrating for applicants, but it's just the world we live in. Surveyors are out 5.5 weeks to get surveys done. That's a total fact. And they're like, well, I need to get the survey. It's like, well, I'm not going to bring this to the Board of Adjustment until they have that, that truth. I've had experience in the past working with county boards that wouldn't require surveys, and we did they would waive them and ended up approving a structure on the neighbor's property. And that didn't work out very well for the county, and that was what we, we want your projects to be not expensive and things like that. We realized that, but that was a very lesson learned early on in my career on that, where the board was like, we'll grant the variance, that's fine. And the neighbor in the room was like, you can't do that, that's my property, But anyway, that's kind of, then it's like, okay, well now we need to require surveys, because you did have to cut the building off, the garage, and it's pretty substantial. And then that gets the city or the county into interesting situations, that we can avoid. There was something else too that, and wetland delineations, if we have the wetlands, these are just like recaps, like there's a couple that are coming in for impervious surface standards probably throughout towards the later part of the year, so they'll have to do these delineations first, because to show if it's wetland or not, and then we have the setback from the wetlands, and if it's not, they don't have to do it. If they do, they need to meet the setback from those. I got to attend a training with the League of Minnesota Cities, and I got to talk about that question about our site visits. And it was interesting, and I figured this was going to be the case. I worked in communities that definitely do site visits, inspections with the board, meaning you guys would go to the site and look at the property for sure. And I worked in communities where boards never saw the property at all, and just their packet hit their desk, and it went from there. Each one has pros and cons. I always advocate the site visit, because especially in this world with all the aerial photography and all the reconnaissance that we can have, I find sometimes people get complacent of at least just seeing the landowner's property. Like if you like let's just go look at it and really see what this thing looks like in the field, versus all the aerial photography and stuff like that. That creates a couple of challenges that we need to talk about over the course of these processes, as perhaps ordinance change, like perhaps what we want to do with the board. Do we want to do on-site inspections with everybody? Talking to the attorney, we have to post those as public hearings, because it is a quorum and the board's together. What that would mean, it would get difficult probably for, me if you're working during the day, like, well, I can't make it out there to that site. So that segued into the next discussion is, if we don't do a quorum, if we broke it up into something like, and I don't think everybody needs to see every single property every time. Like what I'd like to do is, if we ever brought on like new board members, or board members weren't comfortable with a certain project, certainly please call me. We'll get in the vehicle, we'll drive right to the site, and we'll look at it. It's not a public hearing, it doesn't break any serial meeting, and then that way we can have a discussion. Then that way you have somebody there from the city as well too, because when I worked in a county for a number of years, we'd send the board members out there alone. I didn't like that. It was a very big county, but it was the expense of the time. Like the variances would get very expensive, because when you're going from Garrison all the way to Jacobson, Minnesota, or Hill City, that's an hour and 15 minutes on the road one way, and then back, and then if we're going to do a public hearing, because you have to be there in those specific times. Like the attorney said, if you're going to do it with the whole group, because you have to stick to the times. Like if we say, applicant, we're going to be there at 10 o'clock in the morning, we got to be there at 10 o'clock in the morning. Probably not going to see tons of contentious variances, but at the time, somebody, it would be a point of challenge where somebody could say, hey, the Board of Adjustment didn't show up at my site at 9 o'clock. They said they were going to be there. If they didn't, I left, so I wasn't there to hear the public hearing, blah, blah, blah. You can see how that kind of changes. So I would advocate going to the sites. Like, if you guys wanted to see the sites yourself, you're perfectly fine. If you want to say, hey, Pete, I want to come to the site to you just to hear a little bit of background, how the applicant, how this process is moving forward, I'm certainly all on board with that.
Peter, could I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
Do you do a site visit for every application?
That is a great question, and yes, I try to do that for every application in my past experience, and that's what I want to do here as well too, because this is a great example. There's a guy that's wanting to build in town right now. He's from Alaska, and a person sees patterns from certain things. Not that there's anything wrong with Alaska, but traditionally there's not a lot of land use rules there. And I've worked with people from Alaska before in other counties, where they don't have any permit requirement for anything, whether it's a tire shop to mining to anything. It's like zero, non-existent. And I go, yeah, I should look at your site. I sat in the office for a long time and went over the setback from the road right of way. The setback can be 30 feet off the road right of way. And he's like, yep, 30 feet from the road. And I'm like, no, from the property line. Okay, when the road stops. And I'm like, I'm definitely going out to look at this one. I went out there, I think it was yesterday, and he's already excavating the site in, he's rented equipment, he's doing a do-it-yourself project, which is fine, nothing wrong with that as long as we meet setbacks, but he's excavating right up to the property line where the road is. And that's where the site inspection, I go, Keith, you're really lucky I came out here because I've worked in situations where the zoning people, we don't go to the property, because when they sign that application, they're signing that they meet all the requirements and that's on them at the end of the day. Because people will say, well, nobody told me, and that's never an excuse for not knowing what the rules, like in pragmatic terms I put it, if I, shot a deer in June, and it's like, well, the DNR didn't tell me I couldn't do it. And like, well, yeah, that's a rule that I should know. But anyway, I do encourage the site visits for that particular reason. I don't know if you have more into that question or not. That is a good one, because I talked to the homeowner and I go, or the property owner, I go, you need to meet the setback, and he has to get the survey done, because like, I'm going to get the survey done later. And I'm like, Keith, this is why you have the survey up front, because you don't want to put it in the wrong place to start with. He might be before this board with a variance. This is a property out on White Overlook and Serenity, where it turns to gravel, or Shady Lane, where it turns to gravel. There, it's paved and then turns to gravel. And he had some stakes set up where he literally was wanting to put his house like right on the road setback, and it's like, or on the property line. And it's like, no. So it's very helpful to have the site visits. But as far as zoning, as I'm just looking at for placement of the structure, where it's going on the property, and the use, and then the rest of it would be building inspection related stuff with the construction of the structure, which of course that's done through our contracted building official. It's interesting. That's kind of just a few takeaways I have. Or just a few things I wanted to bring up with the board. I'm sure you've heard of it before. Again, my big thing is don't ever let an applicant pressure you guys into thinking you need to make this. It's not. It's on them. Like if they need to get a survey for $2,000 or if it's $75, it doesn't make a difference. Just don't ever let them put you in that seat. Because I've had that where people are like, oh, this is this, and it's like, wait a second. They're asking the permission from the board. And you guys are certainly in the driver's seat with those decisions. And then just the last little thing that you were talking about, Lee, just with some of the building code versus zoning stuff and those ordinances and things like that. Certainly feel free. I don't have the end-all be-all discussion on it, just from seeing it from different perspectives too. I've worked in communities that don't have building code, and it is not a good thing for their residences. It seems like at the end of the day, like looking at Breezy Point's plat of this entire town, without a doubt, this would have turned into a trailer park. Nothing's wrong with trailers, but they would because I've worked in those areas before where perhaps like Aiken County, if you have a very expensive lake lot on Cedar Lake, a very nice, you can drop a trailer right there. Nothing against trailers, good or bad, but it's what the community wants their field to be like. And from my read on Breezy Point, I see, it's a residential neighborhood kind of guided direction, and building code is that extra protection in between the two. And Cross Lake is interesting because they're running a fine line with what they do is because they don't have building code. They do make expensive mistakes on things, but that's the kind of the economics there. But they have where trailers can't be put in, they do have them essentially banned, but they do run the risk if somebody came in to challenge that, they would have a heck of a lot more success because they say, Cross Lake, you don't meet building code, so you don't get to tell us how wide this is. And that's when I was working there, I saw that in the ordinance. I just had discussions with the city attorney at the time about like how would this unfold if somebody challenged this. And he's like, it probably would be very difficult because like in Breezy Point, somebody say, I want to put this park model here, and you can't tell me how wide this is, zoning office. It's like, well, we also have some additional regs of why this isn't the way it wants to be, you know. And, you know, that's it for, you know, some of my topics. The building code thing, though, I just is so eye-opening from seeing different areas, though. On like, if you ever saw the housing development on the northwest side of Mille Lacs Lake, Sherwood Forest, the guy with the Robin Hood out front with the arrow and stuff like that, there's a little gate, and you don't see what goes on behind there. There's about 5,500 people in there in the summertime, and that's more than the city that has the county seat in that county that's in. And that was a renegade trailer park where they platted the properties before they had rules for lot size. A developer came in, platted the property. They didn't have lot sizes because they wanted to let everybody do what they wanted to do, but they thought everybody was going to be like 40 acre, 10 acres, you know. And then somebody from the cities came up and said, hey, I have an inlet here, I'm going to plat this campground. And they sold individual ownership. It's not too different than some of the campground, I think the one here that's gated, but this one's much larger. But anyway, they had their property back there, and the county's like, we just put in 5,000 camper units. How that changes the demographics of the community are quite big, you know, and they couldn't regulate that because they said you have to, because the county has no building code, it's a residential structure. If they want to live in their garage, you can live in the garage. If you want to live in a camper, you can live in a camper, and you can see how that gets kind of interesting. But it's just one for my viewpoint on some of those things. I'm like, okay, well, that's why those
What they
things.
use for sewage.
That's fantastic. And we had a good relationship with them later on. Like, it went to absolute battleground zero because of like having the standards. Because not only did the developer set up selling these properties off separate, they go, we're a campground too, so we're not gonna have, the county's not gonna come in and regulate this campground at all because we're a campground on top of it. And that's when the county went to court with them. And the developer's done other things in southern Minnesota. But at the end of the day, was they had a parcel of land, so they're a landowner just like you in the county, so they need to follow by the same rules and stuff like that. But for the septic stuff, that's what turned into a disaster. Because now you had people putting on trailers on the property, and they say, what are you using for my sewer system? And they go, that plastic outhouse. And it's like the one that tips over and breaks in the wintertime, you know, or there's a hose going to it and it's overflowing. So anyway, the county got in and made them put in large comfort stations, which was extremely expensive, but it was the right way to do it. They're mini municipal sewer systems in there. They're at about 8,000 gallons per day, so that's like probably like 6 to 7 full-size houses, and they put them around in through the area and stuff. But that came at a lot of cost to the campgrounds. But those are some interesting things on like the pros and cons versus the building codes. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about when people say like, ooh, like I've heard that everywhere. Certain things like it's hard to build in Breezy or it's hard to build in Aiken or vice versa type of thing. And then it's also like being a resident in the city. I certainly can see that I'm not a resident, but I can see it being a very good thing for the city, so that somebody doesn't. You know, they're not living in literally a chicken coop, you know, that was designed for something like that. And they're like, you know, well, that's their house, that's their residential unit, you know. And, you know, there's you know, outside of that, you know, the building code here, you know, it's just the standard of what it is. But that, you know, I can see exactly why the city, I didn't obviously know the politicians at that time, but I can totally understand why they said, we need to do this, because if the cart gets out on this, it can get really interesting really quick. And the last one I would talk about is when I lived down in Bullhead City for a little while and worked for the city there. And they, if you're familiar with Arizona, they got a lot of campground parks and stuff like that for snowbirds and things like that. Well, the city let a developer come in, Don Laughlin, he's passed away now, but he was actually from Owatonna, Minnesota. They have all those casinos on the west side of the Colorado River. Well, they want the casinos, but they don't want the staff to work in them and to live in them. So they're like, well, they can live in the city. Well, the city in the Arizona side said, well, we'll open these up to mobile homes and we'll plat it as, you know, recreational stuff. Well, their first population of people that had those properties, they've since have passed on and moved their property on, and it's turned into, if you look at it, it is, the city has a heck of a problem on their hands. And it worked with that a little bit with their public works, where they'd go in, they'd condemn a lot, $10,000, you bid out to a contractor, they'd pull down the trailer, because they didn't have building code. You had people, they had washing machines on their porches, and we're talking really dangerous. Like, I get like, you know, something in the garage, but this is like, you know, especially in the desert area, where here at least we have snow, where stuff can, you know, if you put junk outside, it's gonna get snowing on and stuff like that. But there's some really strange stuff, and then it would catch a unit on fire, and they were stacked in so close, it would melt the siding on another one. And anyway, get a chance sometime to drive through there, if you ever look at it, if somebody's like, what the building code's good for, because that's what they were telling me. They're like, we totally have it. They go, it took that for that city to get it, because they learned a very hard lesson that their tax base is really crippled for a long time. But Holiday Shores is the name of the development. It's on the Colorado River. It started out as a resort vacation area, and it's became a really not good area. But do you guys have any questions for me on anything at this point in time?
I got one quick one.
Yes.
When you were at Cross Lake, did the planning and zoning go out for visits?
Great question, Roger. Yes, they did, and that's where I like that, because it had them engage that dialogue on site. The thing that is difficult is like those attorneys are like, you gotta be on time there, you gotta be perfect, because it's like when we have like 8 stacked on an agenda,
Yeah.
and we're like, well, what do we do? Go back to our office and twiddle our thumbs and waste all your guys' time, or, you know, or have to book, you know, try to figure out how to do that. But yeah, they did it. I think it's very beneficial. I think it's nice too, because then you can have somebody from staff on site as well too. So like I would, even to this day, I still, you know, walk into people's property, you know, like knock on the door, put the business card out and stuff like that. But it's always like, when I worked for the county, they let the board members go to the properties alone. Then you kind of get harangued by the landowner a little bit, possibly, or, you know, or you know, hey, you want to come in and a cup of coffee and stuff like that? And it's like, it's probably good just to view the project and see what it looks like outside, you know, and those type of things. So, but yeah, they seem to really enjoy it. But it made an extra effort with the board, you know, and I know that can be challenging too with people's, you know, schedules. Yeah. So, yeah. But yeah, that's it for staff on those issues or those subjects. And if you have anything, just certainly let me know or reach out. We've been taking in an awful lot of permits right now, standard permits, you know, so people are very busy. So
New or remodels or?
all of the above, absolutely. Yep. And with this winter, it never, you know, it never stopped. And this is the interesting time too, because all the road restrictions are on. So everybody is doing their administrative work as well too. So yeah, it's
You guys might know when the road restrictions come out.
I think they will. It's normally like, I think it's like generally the first or second week of May.
yeah.
No, but I thought it went on early, so they're pulling
Remember,
them.
the cities already pulled
Huh?
Yeah.
them. Cities pulled
In the cities
them.
there? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So there, it's kind of MnDOT pretty much determines, and it's kind of they do it kind of by district, so it's
Right.
generally the cities will go first and then further in the north.
You guys are a week or two behind.
Yeah, we're normally a week or two behind, so they'll probably be pulled early. Looking at the weather, I doubt we're gonna get another hard freeze here, but you know, I probably just jinxed us.
Welcome to the fishing opener again. I think that's important.
Might be a skiing opener this year.
All right, any commissioner reports? All right, meeting adjourned.